I'm Rob Spall.
And I'm Britt Garner.
Welcome to Nature Insight.
Speed dating with the future. This is the podcast where you have a chance to take a different look at the science and policy of biodiversity, peering through the lens of the personal perspectives from those on the front lines of research and action for nature.
In our last episode, we flipped the script on the idea of ugly species, finding that value and beauty really do depend a great deal on your background and your culture. It's another good reason for a science policy platform like IPBES to really focus on including as many different kinds of knowledge and evidence as possible in our work for the strongest possible knowledge base to inform policies and decisions.
Absolutely. And if you've listened to our other seasons, you know that we've talked about the importance of diverse voices, perspectives, and expertise kind of across the board. One of my favorite episodes was actually from our very first season, where I got to speak to Dr. Anne Polina, who is a traditional owner in Western Australia. And she helped us to understand the significance of the magnificent Fitzroy River, but specifically from the perspective of an Indigenous knowledge holder.
That's also one of my all-time favorite episodes, Britt. And just last season, I interviewed Dr. Håkon Stockland about the importance of including the perspectives from the social sciences into the work and the science that IPBES produces.
Yes, another great example of bringing in a perspective we might not typically think about when we are talking about nature and biodiversity. And, I think this is one of the really positive parts of IPBES as a whole and the process, the strong commitment to the values of diversity in all of its diverse ways.
And part of that commitment is also ensuring balanced geographical diversity as well. So building representation of evidence and values from all around the world into the science and the evidence that IPBES produces for decision makers. As it happens, that's also the focus of our episode today. How we're working to widen and deepen engagement with IPBES from different parts of the world.
So are there specific world regions where IPBES is focusing its efforts specifically now versus in the past?
There really are. So in 2016 and in 2020, IPBES asked our wider community to take part in a stakeholder survey, and it was really trying to map who is most engaged with our work and where in the world they're from. And by far, the biggest geographical gaps are in Eastern Europe, in Central Asia, and in Africa. And that's exactly where our episode is heading today. Dr. Axel Paulsch is a Geo-Ecologist based at the Institute of Biodiversity Network in Germany. He also leads projects building contacts between policymakers and scientists, and in recent years, he's been very involved in helping reach out to potential new stakeholders for IPBES in Eastern Europe and in Central Asia. We started by talking about the culture shock that he had when he first joined up as a scientist with intergovernmental processes like those of IPBES.
Well, it is a shock in a way. If you first come to these political meetings, you're completely lost as a scientist because normally you're used to scientific conferences with a strict schedule. Everybody has a 12 minutes presentation and 3 minutes for questions. And then you come to a COP meeting or an IPBES plenary, the schedule is already skipped after the first half day. Well, and then the giving political advice in a way that the policymakers understand what you try to say from a scientific background. It's a task that you don't really learn at the university. So it was quite a learning process for me to get into that interface where you meet people who don't have a similar background than you and don't understand the jargon you speak. And I hope sometimes now I can convey a message.
One of the things that IPBES has done is try to reach out to gain engagement from experts, from scientists, from policymakers from all over the world. And it might be helpful for some of our listeners to also understand when we're talking about engagement, what kinds of things we're actually meaning. This is the nomination of experts to serve as authors with some of IPBES's reports, for instance, or reviewers working on making comments on the drafts of the reports, or being involved in IPBES-related events or taking IPBES findings to decision makers. That's the kind of engagement we're talking about, right?
Exactly. I mean, we try to engage people from different sectors of society. So on the one hand, from the Academy of Natural Sciences in a specific state or whatever, but also from the governments, also from local governments, different governance entities, but also civil society, let's say people who are responsible for specific protected areas, NGOs, and so on. And on the one hand, we see them as knowledge holders who could contribute with their knowledge to IPBES assessment reports, for instance. And on the other hand, as knowledge users that then could take the key messages and see what is in there for their own country when they do new national biodiversity strategy or concepts against degradation or how to use their water sources sustainably or whatever, or do something against invasive alien species if that is a specific problem in their country. So we try to talk to all the different people that have a stakeholders with IPBES from whatever perspective, as users, as knowledge providers, as people that can make use of it in their day-to-day work in the institutions they are in. And not only natural scientists, by the way, because implementing findings that ask you to change your day-to-day behavior is not only a scientific decision, but needs mind change. And that also has to include social sciences and communication teams as you are.
Why is it important for there to be more engagement from areas like Eastern Europe and Central Asia that are perhaps relatively less represented?
Well, on the one hand, the quality of an IPBES assessment depends on the data sources that are used. So the more data that is available, the better the knowledge basis is. There might be different perspectives on looking at nature's values, for instance. We saw that in the values assessment. So if you don't engage a specific region, you will probably lose that perspective. And then on the other hand, making use of the results, a prerequisite is that you know that there are these results. And if there is no entry point into a specific country, then probably the news is not really spreading. And I really had that experience in a big country in Central Asia. I explained the specific assessment and what the key messages are. And the local minister for the environment said, but our country is not a member state, so we cannot make use of it. Then I tried to explain, yeah, but of course your publications of your scientists, they are in, and the messages, if they are useful for you, of course, you can use them. But then on the other hand, if you want to participate more, join the club. And I dare say, in the meantime, they have joined. So maybe not because of me, but but at least they did. So hopefully there's more engagement from that specific country as well now in the future. So,
do you find much of a difference between the challenges to get more engagement from the two areas we've been talking about, so between Eastern Europe and Central Asia?
Yeah, there are differences. One of them, for instance, is the language barrier, specifically in Central Asia. The common language still is Russian. So people have a problem. They're dealing with English texts, only giving their comments in English or whatever, following negotiations that are just in English. And then also how the population is distributed over the country is different. In Central Asia, yes, you have a few bigger cities, but many people are living in the countryside, and the level of decision making is not with the global government so much. If you think about the number of cattle you have on a specific area that is grazed, which either leads to overgrazing or not, that's local decision making. These people are very far away from any internet, from any global reports, from an English key message. Whereas in the Eastern Europe countries and the Balkans, most people live in cities, have access, are internet connected, see pollution in their cities and see it as a problem. That's a different way to reach them than to reach the rural population in a steppe country in Central Asia. Some of the Central Asian countries, some of them are really also quite locked in and close themselves against influence from outside. So it's really hard to even get there and do a workshop. You need extra visa permissions and whatever. So it's not so easy.
So having talked about the challenges, perhaps we should talk a bit about some success stories. Does anything stand out for you as a particular success of the work that you've had in the last 5 years?
one of the Central Asian countries where we had a capacity building workshop. 2 weeks after the workshop, I got an email from a high-ranking government official saying, what exactly do we need to join? Half a year later, they joined IPBES. So I thought, okay, at least we did spread some news and it fell on fertile soil. Of course, you always need the political readiness that a country wants to join a global body. But then maybe that was just the little kick they needed. And then, I mean, you meet these people then again, if you come to plenary sessions or whatever, and they say, Axel, thank you that you brought us in touch with IPBES 8 years ago. And now we really see that it was a good step to join. And then, of course, this is what I take my positive vibrations from with the job I'm doing.
Definitely sounds like there have been some great successes. That's great news. So, Axel, for someone who's never attended a capacity building meeting or a workshop around these sorts of issues, give us a flavor of what that might feel like or look like.
Well, we normally have a group of about 30, 40 participants from the region, so 5-6 countries. And sometimes people already know each other at least a bit, and many don't. So in the first hours are a bit shy, but then we try to give them a lot of opportunity to talk to each other, to network, to get used to each other, to tell their stories from their countries. And then they suddenly discover, oh, what, you are facing the same problem in your country. Why don't we talk about it? And then it's not so much about us telling how things are in Germany, but give them the chance to work together. And then we do group work and so on. And then they get more and more open and talk to each other. And then when we re-invite them to the next meeting, it's somehow a bit like a family reunion. Good that you're back. How did your things develop? And by the way, we tried what you tried last year. And well, how did you solve this and this problem? So my role as a moderator is listening from meeting to meeting. So they start to form a kind of community. And this is exactly what we want, because
that's the capacity that we're trying to build.
Exactly. Yeah. And when the project is over, the show shouldn't stop, but they should go on by themselves, building a network. So we always try to give a positive atmosphere and let people talk, and not being strictly to the timing, 15 minutes slot here, 10 minutes slot here, 5 minutes coffee break here. So just let it flow a bit and then see how it develops. And people come back when I re-invite them. So when they don't have to, if they didn't like it the first time, they don't have to come a second time.
See, you were just saying at the top of the program that you were shocked when you first joined IPBES and other meetings about how the agenda doesn't always go exactly as planned. And here you are telling us how fantastic it is that that's the case.
Yes, that's the learning curve I took from being a poor scientist to now working on a science policy interface.
If you had one message, Axel, if you could share one message with people in Eastern Europe and Central Asia who might be listening but don't yet know anything about IPBES, what would you say to them to motivate them to engage?
Well, I would say we are everywhere in the world. We are facing environmental problems, and IPBES is the worldwide body that tries to bring up solutions that then can be implemented, and it comes for free. So joining that can only be positive. Even if you don't get anything out of it, it doesn't cost you anything. So why not take the opportunity of this global endeavor? And you will discover, once you're part of it, you get a lot out of it.
So I gotta say, the commentary at the beginning about the process and about the agenda, perhaps, for an IPBES meeting, did some of that ring true for you? What was that about?
No, in our defense, I think IPBES is one of the few intergovernmental processes that tends to stick pretty much to the agenda, although I have been in many that don't. So it's indicative rather than specific to IPBES.
That is very, very fair. You know, I think what really stood out, sort of the thesis statement, is the work that IPBES does to widen engagement can be really in two ways, right? We want to first include evidence and perspectives from these regions, and then also we want to ensure that the work IPBES does actually gets used. So not only is stuff in the reports being produced widely and diversely, but also consumed widely and diversely.
And in fact, coming back to something we talked about in earlier episodes this season, Britt, the idea of bringing a communications perspective to this whole discussion. In communications, the worst kind of communications are those that are just single directional, the ones that you just put out information and hope somebody's hearing them. You really need that dialogue. You need the two-way discussion. And I think that's what they were getting at with this idea of contributing the evidence, but then also using the results and using the findings.
I got really excited when he mentioned the role of moderator decreasing over time.
Yes.
That's kind of like, educator's dream, right? It's like, if I'm doing my job right, my students are the ones asking and answering questions with each other, right? Like, that's the dream. And so it was really cool to hear his perspective about how his role actually did decrease over time. And that itself is a kind of success.
And the other success which he talked about, which has also been really positive for IPBES, is through these workshops, through these engagements, reaching out to governments and member states that weren't yet part of IPBES, that weren't yet members, and explaining to them that all that was necessary was literally just the expression of interest, the expression of desire to be an IPBES member with no further financial commitment, no further commitment of resources, and then literally that's all it takes to become a member of IPBES.
All right, heads of states, looking at you. Send those sweet, sweet letters.
Those of you who are listening.
That's right. We know you're all listening. It's free. You got to take part. It's just so awesome that it's so open and available. It's really exciting.
So Axel and his team have been hard at work for IPBES in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. But that still leaves Africa as the other region least represented in the work of IPBES. So Dr. Isimemen Osemwegie is the program coordinator with capacity development for biodiversity and ecosystem services experts, also known as CABES. And that's an organization that works to develop very specific scientific and policy capacity and expertise in West Africa, Central Africa, and East Africa, also to contribute to the work of IPBES. Isimemen told me about the importance of building biodiversity capacity in Africa, something that CABES is doing through peer-to-peer learning, through webinars, and through a really innovative master's degree program.
Africa still has one of the largest intact biodiversity globally. Even the Congo Basin is referred to as the lung of Africa. I think it's the largest terrestrial carbon sink. And even the Amazon is second to it in terms of, the carbon sequestered. And it's threatened, of course, by climate change and, anthropogenic impacts. So it's really important that, using IPBES policy recommendations, that governments are really working to conserve this biodiversity, not for only the present generation, but, for the future generation. So I think it's important that the African stakeholders are on board.
For most of our audience, possibly the idea of building capacity or capacity building might not be something they work with every day. What do we actually mean by that?
Most of IPBES assessment, it's on the global level. So what we try to do is to, take that and break it into simpler bits to the local context, to like, how is this applicable to the African audience? So this way it's relatable and they can, see the value of this assessment and what it offers to them. So in some contexts, we are building the capacity, raising awareness that they can actually be involved in IPBES process, showing them like, this is how it really works. It's not a black box. You can actually be part of it if you do this, and this, and this. And in some other contexts, we are strengthening their capacities. And for some others, it's actually providing them a platform to share their knowledge. They have the knowledge, but then it's just providing that collaborative space.
How popular is the master's program, for instance? Do you have a lot of applicants for that?
Yes, we do. In the last call for application we put out, we received over 900 applications.
Wow. For how many places?
Sadly, just 39.
Very competitive process.
Yeah, because it's fully funded.
Wow.
The flight tickets are paid to the country, and then you have stipends, laptops are provided for you, and then you have a research budget provided. And then, of course, the networks. A lot of them really take advantage of these networks to move on. So, for example, in the large batch of students, before they graduated, we already had 2 accepted into doctoral programs. I think one of them was already employed.
One of the great things about working with students at all levels, whether it's undergraduate students or master's students, is the characters that you often get the opportunity to get to know. In the process of the work that you've had with CABES, have any of the characters of your participants or any of the students really stood out for you?
Yeah, I have quite a couple example. So what we do, since the master's program is transdisciplinary, so the students are trained to work not only with scientific actors, but non-scientific actors as well. Just recently, one of our graduates, he wrote a thank you note to CABES to say because of CABES, he was at Cali as the president of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network of Guinea-Bissau, mainstreaming youth voices into biodiversity policy.
You're talking about the recent COP of the Convention on Biological Diversity in Colombia.
Yes.
Oh, great.
He was there, and I wasn't even there. I was just following online, but one of our students was there, sponsored by the African Wildlife Fund, and his background was in English language before joining our IPBES master's program. I think it's amazing to see the transformation that happens in this youth. I can give that example of one of our students from Niger. He conducted economic valuation. This is linked to the IPBES assessment on land degradation within dryland. So he did economic valuation of the resources of that system and submitted a technical brief to the Ministry of Environment, where he was intern at during that process. There was an instant policy uptake. He was invited by the ministry to assist to draft a national strategy for the management of oasis ecosystems.
CABES seems to have a lot of different modalities of offering different types of capacity building. So you've got the master's degrees, you've got these peer-to-peer learnings, you do things online, you do things in person. Is there one particular part of the program that's proven most popular or that's had the best kind of response in terms of engagement?
I think where we really have the largest engagement is in our workshops, our face-to-face workshops. So we had the first big workshop. This was a regional workshop, over 130 participants from over 40 countries across Africa. It was awesome because you could see the connection, the collaboration that this brings. For me, it was really a huge blessing to meet for the first time, people from Comoros, from Mauritius, attending this event. It was amazing. And from that event, I think we were able to guide some countries to actually become members of IPBES. When they saw the event, they saw what was happening, what was IPBES, and we had a section on how to, be a member of IPBES. They went back to their ministries. I think Somalia is one of them. The Republic of Guinea is one of them as well.
I also think I remember reading somewhere that even though the master's programs are taking place in just 3 universities as kind of the pilot project, that the number of participants and particularly the different countries that they represent was also quite diverse.
I mean, that's the beauty of the model we are operating, because for us, the idea is, yes, on the one hand, is to point our stakeholders, including the youths, of course, to IPBES. But on the other hand, is to, foster a regional collaboration among, these professionals that we are training. For example, the last batch that graduated from the University of Bayreuth, we had 23 students, and each was from a different country.
23 different countries. Wow.
Yes. I meet someone from Cabo Verde, students from Guinea-Bissau, students from Angola, from Chad. It's amazing to see. And then when the students graduate, they keep that network and that collaboration alive.
Obviously, CABES has learned a lot of lessons in the work that it's done. Are these the kinds of lessons, do you think, that could be translated into similar kinds of projects for building capacity in other regions of the world, perhaps like Asia or the Americas?
Yes, definitely. I think we have a model that can be replicated. But I think what should not be missed is the inclusivity. So we don't just go there into other regions we are working in, like we have, the solutions and this is it. We try to work with local partners. So when I talk, for example, about our master's program, this is thanks to, our local partners. This kind of model of the master's program, whether the networking opportunities where we bring these master's students together with policymakers can be replicated anywhere, but you have to understand the local context. We see that there is really strong variation in the social-political context of the different countries we're working with. So you have to understand that you have to work closely with local partners and, really be open to adapt to the realities in these countries.
I'm really excited to have the chance to talk with you about this today because I think you're aware as well. Africa is really a big focus at the moment for a lot of the work that IPBES has been doing. And in fact, you could almost say there's a bit of an African moment happening for IPBES. We've got the first ever chair of IPBES from Africa, Dr. David Obura from Kenya. There are a large number of new African states that have joined IPBES, partly because of the work that CABES has been doing. With all of this in mind, what do you think is necessary to keep this momentum going and to translate this momentum into longer term, more dynamic engagement from African stakeholders with IPBES?
Yeah, we need to keep raising awareness. For example, after one of the IPBES meetings with its national focal point, we have Mauritania reaching out to CABES to say, include me in what you are doing. But because of, financial constraints, we limited ourselves to West Central and East Africa and a little bit into South Africa. So we've not really gone deep into North Africa, for example. So I think awareness is still something that should be pushed out there. And something else could be the language. Looking at West Africa, for example, you have 8 Francophone countries there, 5 English speaking only. And IPBES's assessment, when it's out for review, it's only in the English language. So they feel left out.
Historically, Africa has, at least from Western science, often been seen as a subject to be studied. There really is a need for greater voices from Africa and from other underrepresented parts of the IPBES community to also be part of the process and be part of actually improving the strength and the quality of the science. Would you say that CABES contributes to that?
Yes, we do. Through our webinars, our information section, we are informing the scientists that they can actually contribute to global platforms like IPBES, that they have the knowledge and they can also, be part of this work.
Oh, that English major hanging out at the biodiversity COP. Oh my gosh, could I be more thrilled at an anecdote? No, I cannot.
Yeah, I think my favorite example was the former student who was the intern at the Environment Ministry in Niger and was invited as an intern to help draft the national strategy on drylands. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Oh, it's just so cool. Exactly. And to have that interdisciplinary framework as well. I mean, that's so IPBES and also so necessary for tackling the kind of challenges we face. Also thinking about the scale, so not just the interdisciplinary nature, but simply how massive this is of what CABES does. Having one workshop with more than 130 participants from over 40 countries? That's just incredible.
And this is just a pilot program. You can imagine what this would look like if it was taken to scale.
Oh, yeah.
Also, the approach that Isimemen talked about, I think, is particularly interesting, where Africa for so long was really the subject of study, an object of research, but increasingly it's become very central to the process of strengthening the science and the policy for nature and people.
And I think it's so cool to hear from these voices and to see kind of what that future might be. So what does it mean for that work happening locally to expand out? Something like CABES going up to something like IPBES, and then thinking about what that could mean for our shared future.
And hopefully the end result being much greater representation from Africa, from Eastern Europe, and from Central Asia in the work that IPBES does.
It benefits everyone. That's it for this episode of Nature Insight, Speed Dating with the Future. I'm Britt Garner.
And I'm Rob Spall. Our next episode will also be the last of the current season. Appropriately, we're going to be talking about endlings, the last surviving members of a species. How should we be approaching the loss of a species, and how do we know for sure that one has actually become extinct? We'll be hearing perspectives not only from the world of science, but also a poetic tribute to the pathos of endlings through poetry.
And in the meantime, you can learn more about IPBES's work on www.ipbes.net or on any of their social media channels. Just search for @IPBES, that's @IPBES. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.